Hey warriors, somewhere in your day today, you did something small and quiet without thinking twice about it. Maybe you checked your phone one more time instead of finishing the work in front of you. Maybe you said yes to a plan you didn't want just to keep the peace. A comment from someone who barely knows you got to live rent-free in your head for the rest of the afternoon. None of that feels like a crisis, it never does. But drip by drip, these tiny surrenders are the reason so many of us wake up successful on paper and strangely hollow in the mirror. Self-respect isn't a personality trait. It's not something you either have or don't. It's built the same way a stonemason builds a wall, one deliberate placement at a time. And it can be worn down the same way, one careless day at a time. The old Stoics understood this with a clarity that modern self-help often misses. Zeno of Citium, the merchant-turned-philosopher who founded the entire school after losing his fortune in a shipwreck, taught his students that well-being is reached through small steps, and yet the outcome is anything but small. He wasn't talking about grand gestures. He was talking about the unglamorous discipline of daily choices, the kind nobody applauds, the kind that quietly decides who you become. Go back to the last time you actually felt proud of yourself. Not congratulated by someone else. Proud, on your own, in a quiet room with no audience. Chances are it wasn't tied to a huge achievement. It was probably something small you did when nobody was checking, a promise you kept only to yourself. That's the exact feeling this video is built to hand back to you, on repeat, until it stops feeling rare. 9 habits, pulled straight from Stoic practice, rebuild self-respect from the inside out. Not by telling you to think positive, not by handing you a slogan. These are working habits, the kind actual Stoics use to hold their ground under real pressure. Exile, illness, betrayal, the loss of fortune and status. And by the end of this video, you'll have a full toolkit for rebuilding the version of yourself you can actually look in the eye without flinching. Before we start, do 3 things for me. Hit like, because it helps this reach someone who needs it today, maybe someone in a moment exactly like the one you're in right now. Drop a comment telling me which number you think will hit hardest before you even watch it. And subscribe, because this channel exists to give you tools like this every single week. Not once, not occasionally, every week. One more thing. Don't skip ahead. Each of these 9 habits builds on the one before it, and skipping means missing the piece that makes the next one click into place. None of these 9 habits ask you to become a different person overnight, and none of them require you to feel confident before you start. Confidence, if you've ever chased it directly, has a bad habit of showing up only after the work is already done, not before. So don't wait to feel ready. Just start with number 1 and let the confidence catch up later, the way it always does. Type this out before you scroll 1 more inch and mean it. I rebuild today. Number 1. Start with a North Star. A lot of days get spent purely in reaction. An email arrives, you respond. A notification buzzes, you check it. A friend suggests a plan, you follow. There's nothing wrong with flexibility, but when an entire life gets built out of reactions, nothing actually gets decided. It just gets carried. And here's the quiet damage that does. A person who never decides anything eventually stops respecting the person making the non-decisions, because there's no one steering the ship. Seneca wrote to his friend Lucilius that if a man does not know which port he is sailing to, no wind will ever be favorable. Read that twice. It sounds simple, almost obvious, but sit with what it actually means. Wind isn't good or bad on its own. A storm that wrecks one ship pushes another one home faster, purely because that second ship knew where it was headed. Circumstances work the same way in a life. The exact same setback, the same rejection, the same slow morning can either derail you or fuel you, and the difference isn't the event. It's whether direction existed before the event hit. A North Star doesn't have to be a 5-year plan with color-coded milestones. It can be one sentence you could say out loud without flinching, something like, I want to become someone who finishes what they start. Or, I want to be the calmest person in every room I enter. That's it. That's enough to start reshaping decisions, because now every choice gets measured against something real, instead of against whatever feels urgent in the moment. A North Star changes daily friction in a specific way. Without one, every request from someone else feels like an obligation you have to weigh from scratch every single time, which is exhausting on its own. With one, most decisions start answering themselves. Does this pull toward the person I said I want to become, or away from them? That single filter clears out an enormous amount of the mental noise currently draining your energy before lunch even arrives. Once that anchor exists, the whole internal question changes. Instead of, what do I feel like doing? It becomes, what does the person I'm building want me to do? That shift alone saves you from half the decisions you currently regret. It won't make life easier. Storms still come. But you'll notice something Seneca understood 2,000 years ago. Direction turns chaos into fuel, and self-respect grows every single time you choose the star over the impulse. Write your North Star on a sticky note tonight. Not a paragraph, one sentence. Put it somewhere you'll see it before you check your phone tomorrow morning. Small placement, real weight. If the sentence still feels vague after you write it, that's fine. Sharpen it over the next few days. Getting it perfect on the first try isn't the point. Finally, having a direction to sharpen is. A North Star will occasionally cost you something in the short term, a plan you have to decline, a habit you have to drop, a comfortable option that no longer fits. That's not a flaw in the process. That's the process actually working, because direction that never costs you anything usually isn't a direction at all. It's just a preference you haven't been tested on yet. If you're done drifting and ready to steer, put this in the comments. I choose my direction. Number 2. Imagine loss to love what you have. This one sounds strange at first, maybe even a little dark. Stay with it because it's one of the most practical tools the Stoics ever built, and it directly rebuilds self-respect in a way most people never expect. Epictetus, who spent part of his life as a slave before becoming one of Rome's most sought-after teachers, told his students something almost unsettling. When you kiss your child goodnight, remind yourself silently that you are kissing someone mortal. Not because tragedy should be expected, because that quiet reminder strips away the numbness built up around the people and things we're most likely to take for granted. He called this practice a way of guarding the mind against shock, but it does something else too, something he understood but rarely spelled out directly. It makes you present, and presence is a form of respect, both for what's in front of you and for yourself. Here's the connection to self-respect that gets missed constantly. Drifting through your own life half numb, ignoring your health until it breaks, ignoring your relationships until they crack, ignoring your own potential until someone younger and hungrier takes the opportunity you were sitting on, isn't humility. It's carelessness with something valuable, and on some level, you already know it. That knowledge sits in the back of the mind and quietly erodes how much you trust yourself. The erosion is easy to miss from the inside, and that's worth sitting with for a second. Nobody wakes up one day and decides to stop appreciating their own life. It happens the way rust happens, slowly, invisibly, until the hinge stops moving the way it used to. Numbness isn't a single decision. It's the residue left behind by 1,000 moments where attention was available and got spent somewhere else instead. Once a week, not obsessively, just enough to reset attention. Try picturing life without something currently taken for granted, not to cause pain, to see clearly again. A morning without the ability to walk outside freely. An inbox without a single opportunity in it. Silence where a friend's voice used to be. Then open your eyes and look at what's actually still there. This isn't pessimism dressed up in philosophy. It's the opposite. It's the fastest route back to gratitude that actually sticks. because gratitude built on comparison to loss is sturdier than gratitude built on good moods. Good moods fade by lunchtime. This kind of clarity tends to stay for days. One caution here. This exercise is meant to sharpen appreciation, not to feed anxiety about everything that might be lost. If it starts tipping into constant worry instead of gratitude, dial it back to once a week and let it do its quiet work in the background instead of running on a loop. Treating your own life, your own body, your own time as something worth guarding changes how you act. That's where the self-respect comes from, not from convincing yourself you're worthy. From acting like someone who already knows they are, in the small choices nobody else ever sees. Before you close this tab, go put this where I can see it. I see what I have. Number 3. Respect yourself by choosing where you bend. Flexibility and spinelessness get confused constantly, and the two aren't remotely the same thing. Flexibility means you can adjust your approach. Spinelessness means abandoning your position the moment someone pushes back. Without a clear read on which one is happening in real time, self-respect keeps leaking out through every conversation avoided and every boundary quietly crossed. Cato the Younger is the sharpest example history gives us here. When Julius Caesar was consolidating power over Rome, offering deals, alliances, and quiet compromises to nearly every senator who might oppose him, Cato refused every single one, not out of rigidity for its own sake. He had already decided, long before the pressure arrived, exactly which principles he would never trade away. Historians describe him as almost impossible to bribe, almost impossible to flatter, and it wasn't luck. It was preparation. His non-negotiables were settled before anyone tested them, which meant that in the moment of pressure, there was no internal debate left to have. That's the actual skill worth building, starting today. Ground gets lost in the moment of confrontation constantly, because position and defense get decided at the same time, under pressure, with someone watching. That's an impossible spot to win from. The fix is deciding bending points in advance, on a calm afternoon with no one pushing. Ask plainly, where will I compromise and where will I not? Write it down if that helps. Picture how differently a negotiation goes when one side already knows their floor price and the other side is figuring theirs out live, on the spot. The prepared side barely has to try. That same imbalance plays out in ordinary conversations, in family arguments, in workplace requests that quietly ask for a standard to be lowered that was never agreed to in the first place. Preparation is the entire advantage, and it costs nothing but a few honest minutes alone beforehand. Once the answer exists ahead of time, something shifts in how a person carries themselves. Over-explaining stops. Apologizing for boundaries that were reasonable to begin with stops. That exhausting cycle of agreeing to something and resenting it for a week afterward stops. People will still push. That never stops either. But the pushing lands differently once the line is already known, because a boundary decided in advance sounds completely different from a boundary invented in panic. A quick word of caution, since this habit can tip into rigidity if it's not watched. Not every hill is worth defending, and part of choosing lines wisely is admitting that most disagreements don't actually touch anything that matters at the core. Save the firmness for what genuinely counts, and let the rest go without a fight. That distinction, more than the firmness itself, is what separates Cato from someone who's simply difficult. Self-respect isn't built by winning every argument. It's built by knowing, before the argument starts, exactly who you refuse to become in order to avoid it. Cato lost eventually in the political sense. Rome fell to Caesar anyway. But nobody remembers him as a man who bent, and that's a kind of victory the outcome never touched. Show me you've drawn your line by typing this below. I know my line. Number 4. Stop being pushed by your emotions. Emotions don't arrive fully formed, And the Stoics figured that out long before modern psychology confirmed it almost word for word. There's a gap, tiny but real, between the moment something happens and the moment a full reaction sets in. Chrysippus, the third head of the Stoic school and arguably its sharpest logician, called the earliest flicker of a feeling a first movement. A flash of anger when someone cuts you off. A jolt of anxiety when your phone buzzes at an odd hour. He argued these flickers aren't fully controllable, and he wasn't interested in pretending otherwise. What happens after that flicker is where the actual choice lives. That gap goes unused constantly, simply because it goes unnoticed. An insult lands, and 30 seconds later, a reply gets fired back that will get regretted by dinner. Anxiety spikes, and within a minute, 3 unrelated worries have spiraled in that have nothing to do with the original trigger. None of this is weakness. It's untrained reflex, and reflexes can be retrained the same way an athlete retrains a flinch through hours of unremarkable repetition nobody ever sees. Picture the gap physically, almost like a doorway. The trigger walks up to the door. What comes next is a decision. Open it immediately, or pause with a hand on the handle for 2 extra seconds. 2 seconds sounds like nothing. In practice, it's the entire difference between a reaction you regret and a response you'd stand behind. The next time that first spark hits, whatever it is, don't act on it and don't suppress it either. Suppression just delays the explosion, it doesn't remove it. Name it instead. Silently, in your own head, say what it actually is. That's anger. That's the sting of feeling embarrassed. Naming an emotion does something almost mechanical to the brain. It moves the reaction from the reflexive part of the mind into the reasoning part, and once it's there, the next move gets chosen instead of dragged out by force. Self-respect and emotional control meet exactly here. Reacting without thinking hands control of your behavior over to whoever or whatever triggered it. A stranger's rude comment gets to decide your mood for an hour. That's not strength, and deep down, that much is already obvious. But catching the first movement and choosing a deliberate response proves something no outside validation can replace. It proves you're the one steering, not the trigger, and that proof compounds every single time it gets repeated. This gets easier with repetition, almost mechanically so. The first few times the gap gets caught, it'll feel deliberate and a little clumsy, like learning to brake smoothly instead of slamming the pedal. Give it a few weeks. Eventually the pause becomes automatic, and what used to feel like restraint starts to feel like nothing more than how you naturally operate. Prove you caught the gap this time. Drop this in the comments. I choose my response. Number 5. Train your margin for suffering. Musonius Rufus, sometimes called the Roman Socrates, taught something that sounds almost old-fashioned today and is exactly why it still works. Comfort, left unchecked, quietly weakens a person, while small doses of voluntary hardship build a kind of reserve strength that can be called on when real difficulty arrives uninvited. He didn't mean seeking out suffering for its own sake. He meant practicing discomfort on purpose, in small controlled amounts, so it stops being a stranger when it shows up on its own terms. Look at how discomfort typically gets handled day to day. A room gets slightly too warm, and the air conditioning remote gets grabbed immediately. A task feels tedious for 10 minutes, and a phone gets checked as an escape. Hunger shows up an hour before the usual meal, and it gets treated like an emergency. None of these are dramatic failures on their own, but stacked together across years, they train something specific into the nervous system, the belief that discomfort is intolerable and must be eliminated immediately. That belief is expensive. It means the first real hardship life throws your way, a job loss, an illness, a hard conversation, lands on a person with zero practice absorbing pressure. A useful comparison sits in how muscle actually adapts. Nobody expects to lift a heavy weight on day one without preparation, and nobody blames the bar for feeling heavy. Training builds the capacity first. Emotional and mental resilience follow the same rule, even though that rule rarely gets applied to them. Calm under a crisis somehow gets expected despite never once practicing calm under anything smaller. The fix Musonius pointed to is deceptively simple. Build a small margin on purpose. Take a cold shower for the last 30 seconds instead of stepping out early. Sit with a hard task for 10 extra minutes before allowing a break. Walk somewhere instead of driving, even when driving is easier. Skip a meal occasionally, not as punishment, just as practice. None of these need to be extreme, and extreme isn't the goal. Consistency is, applied in doses small enough to actually keep doing. One clarification, since this habit gets misunderstood often: this isn't about glorifying misery or pretending discomfort feels good. It doesn't, and it isn't supposed to. The goal is narrower and more useful than that, proving in small controlled doses that discomfort is survivable, so the next time it shows up uninvited, it arrives as familiar territory instead of a threat. Beyond willpower, this builds evidence. Choosing the slightly harder path on purpose and coming out fine on the other side gathers proof that more can be handled than assumed. That proof becomes the foundation of real self-respect, the kind that doesn't collapse the first time life gets difficult, because a smaller version of that difficulty already got tested, and the ending is already known. If you're tougher than you give yourself credit for, say so right now. I can handle this. Number 6. Decide like your future self. Marcus Aurelius wrote his private notebook, the collection now called Meditations, mostly at night, often exhausted, ruling an empire under constant military and political pressure. One thread runs through almost every entry, a relentless habit of stepping outside the current moment to ask how the choice in front of him would look from further away. Not how it felt right then, in the heat of frustration or fatigue, but how it would look once the dust settled, once the emotion of the moment had burned off entirely. Bad decisions share a common thread constantly. They get made by the version of a person who's tired, hungry, anxious, or annoyed, and that version has terrible judgment, not from weakness, but because stress genuinely narrows how far ahead a person can see. The angry version wants the last word. The exhausted version wants to skip the workout. The anxious version wants to send the message that gets regretted an hour later. None of these versions are lying about how they feel. They're just poor representatives for the person actually being built. The same way nobody would hand their most important decisions to someone who hadn't slept in 2 days. Before a decision that carries any real weight, pause and ask one question. What would the version of me 5 years from now, having actually built the life I want, choose right here? Not what feels good in the next 10 minutes. What would that steadier, more grounded version actually pick? This isn't about ignoring current feelings. It's about refusing to let the most temporary version of yourself make permanent decisions on behalf of everyone else you're going to be. It helps to picture that future self as someone specific rather than an abstraction. Give them a posture, a tone of voice, a way of handling pressure worth admiring. The clearer that picture gets, the easier it becomes to ask what they'd do and actually hear an answer, instead of getting silence back. There's a simple test for knowing whether this tool is actually being used or just going through the motions. If asking the question changes the answer, it's working. If the answer stays exactly the same every time, that's probably rationalizing the impulsive choice instead of genuinely consulting the steadier self, and that's worth noticing before acting. Every decision made from panic or impulse becomes a decision the future self has to clean up after, and cleaning up your own mess over and over wears down trust in yourself in a way that's genuinely exhausting. But every decision made with the future self in mind is a gift handed forward, and receiving consistent gifts from your own past choices is one of the quietest, most reliable ways to start trusting yourself again. Speak for the person you're building. Comment this below. I decide for my future. Number 7. Finish strong. Cleanthes took over leadership of the Stoic school after Zeno's death, and almost nothing about his path was easy. He worked nights hauling water and grinding grain just to afford his philosophy lessons during the day, and he kept at it for years before anyone recognized him as a serious thinker. One line attributed to him captures the entire Stoic attitude toward difficulty. Fate leads the one who is willing and drags the one who is unwilling. The event happens either way. The only real choice is walking through it or getting pulled through it, kicking and resentful the whole way. This matters enormously for how things get finished, because most self-respect damage doesn't happen at the starting line. It happens in the middle, when the initial motivation has worn off and the task in front of you has turned dull and repetitive. Everyone feels inspired on day 1. Almost no one feels inspired on day 43. That gap between day 1 energy and day 43 reality is exactly where projects, workouts, relationships and goals quietly die. Not with a dramatic collapse, just a slow fade nobody names out loud, until the realization hits that it hasn't been touched in weeks. What actually rebuilds respect isn't the finishing itself. It's what finishing proves to you about you. Every unfinished project sitting somewhere in a life, half written, half built, half committed to, quietly whispers the same message every time it gets noticed. Follow-through isn't happening here. That message compounds. Trusting your own commitments gets harder the more evidence stacks up against them, and eventually commitments stop getting made at all, just to avoid adding to the pile. The way out of that pattern isn't more motivation. Motivation was never the actual problem, it's just unreliable by nature, here on Monday and gone by Wednesday. What closes the gap is lowering the size of what counts as finishing something. The entire project doesn't need completing this week. One honest, defined piece of it does, something small enough that skipping it would feel more effortful than doing it. And if the thing picked doesn't feel important enough to count, let that worry go. The size of the task has almost nothing to do with the size of the lesson it teaches. A finished small thing rewires self-perception far more than an abandoned big thing ever could, no matter how impressive the big thing sounded when it first got announced. Pick one thing right now, today, that's been left to stall out. Not a huge one, a manageable one. Finish it this week. Not perfectly, just finished. That single completed thing does more for self-respect than 10 new ambitious goals still unstarted, because respect isn't earned by intention. It's earned by follow-through, the unglamorous kind, the kind Cleanthes practiced while everyone else assumed he'd quit hauling water and go find something easier. Tell me you're not adding this to the pile. Type it out. I finish what I start. Number 8. Small acts, big dignity. Heracles, a later Stoic teacher, described something he called circles of concern. Picture yourself at the center of a set of rings. The innermost ring is your own mind and body. The next ring out is immediate family. Beyond that, community, then country, then, in the widest ring, humanity as a whole. His teaching wasn't abstract theory. It was a practical instruction. Draw the outer circles inward. Treat a stranger with a little more of the care shown to family. Treat a community with a little more attention than distance usually allows. The piece that gets missed constantly with this idea is simple. The outer circles can't get drawn inward if the innermost circle, mind and body, is neglected and running on empty. Dignity toward others starts with dignity toward yourself, and dignity toward yourself gets built through small, boring, repeated acts that nobody applauds. Making your bed, answering an email that's been avoided, speaking to yourself without contempt after a mistake. None of these show up on a highlight reel. All of them accumulate into how much weight your own word carries with you. Small acts matter more than big declarations for a specific reason. Announcing, "I'm going to change my whole life starting Monday," and then doing nothing makes zero deposits into a trust account. Quietly keeping one small promise to yourself every single day without announcing it to anyone runs compound interest on self-respect, and compound interest, as anyone who understands it will explain, looks unimpressive at first and undeniable later, once the sum finally becomes visible. Consider how this plays out with something as ordinary as speaking to yourself after a mistake. Contempt is the usual default in that moment, a sharp inner voice that would never get tolerated from another person. That contempt feels like accountability, but it isn't. It's cruelty aimed inward, and cruelty doesn't build dignity, it corrodes it. The Stoic alternative isn't excusing the mistake, it's addressing it the way a good coach would, directly, honestly, and without the insult attached. This habit naturally feeds back into the circles Heracles described. A person who consistently honors small commitments to themselves tends to show up more reliably for family, for community, for everyone in the wider rings. Dignity, it turns out, isn't something rationed between yourself and others. It's a single practice that happens to radiate outward once it's genuinely there. Pick one small, boring act of dignity today. Not a resolution, not a 5-point plan, one action, completed once. Make the bed, reply to the message that's been dodged, drink the water instead of the third coffee. Small and consistent always outperforms big and abandoned, because self-respect isn't measured by the size of the gesture. It's measured by how often a word to yourself actually gets kept in rooms nobody else was watching. Make it official in the comments, where it counts. I keep my word. Number 9. Daily anchors for when the world sways. Posidonius, one of the most wide-ranging minds the Stoic tradition produced, studied astronomy, geography, and the tides alongside philosophy, and he kept returning to one idea across all of it. The world moves in patterns, and a person who understands the pattern can navigate the movement instead of being thrown by it. He applied this to the mind just as much as to the ocean. A life without structure isn't free. It's adrift, reacting to whatever current happens to be strongest that day, with no way to predict which direction it'll pull next. This is the habit holding all the other 8 together, because none of them survive on willpower alone. Willpower is a limited resource that depletes across the day, spent a little at a time on decisions most people never even notice they're making. Anchors don't deplete because they're not decisions, they're routines, and routines run on autopilot once they're built, freeing up the exact mental energy the other 8 habits need to actually function. A morning anchor might be 5 minutes of silence before touching your phone. An evening anchor might be one honest question before bed. Where did I act like the person I'm trying to become today, and where did I fall short? Not for punishment, for information. The tone matters here more than expected. An honest inventory taken with curiosity produces change. The same inventory taken with self-punishment usually just produces avoidance the next time checking in feels tempting at all. Self-respect erodes fastest when days blur together without reflection, because progress gets lost track of entirely. Steady improvement can happen while everything still feels stuck, simply because nothing marked the improvement enough to notice it. A daily anchor, even a small one, becomes a checkpoint. It forces a moment of honest contact with yourself, and that contact, repeated daily, is what actually lets the slowly emerging version of you become visible, week over week, instead of staying a guess. Give it time before judging whether it's working. Tides don't reverse in a day, and neither will years of drifting through days without structure. Stay with the anchor through the first few weeks, where it still feels forced, and eventually it feels less like a task on a list and more like simply who you are now. Pick one anchor for the morning and one for the evening. Keep them small enough that skipping feels harder than doing them. That's the whole trick. Not intensity, repetition. Posidonius spent his life studying tides precisely because tides are reliable, and reliability is exactly what self-respect has been missing this entire time. Claim this one out loud, in the comments, before you close the app. I show up for myself. 9 habits, and not one of them requires talent, luck, or permission from anyone else. A North Star to steer by. The discipline to imagine loss, so what's already here actually gets seen. Boundaries decided before the pressure arrives. The pause between a feeling and a reaction. A trained margin for discomfort. Decisions made by the version of you still worth becoming. The follow-through to finish what gets started. Small acts that quietly compound into dignity, and daily anchors that hold the whole structure together when everything else in life is swaying. None of this happens overnight, and anyone claiming it does is selling something. Zeno was right at the very start of this video. Well-being comes through small steps, and the outcome is anything but small. That's not a contradiction. It's just how real change has always worked, quietly, unglamorously, one deliberate choice at a time, until the person in the mirror finally becomes someone worth trusting again, without having to talk yourself into it. Mastering all 9 this week isn't the goal, and trying to would probably backfire anyway. Pick one habit from this list, just one, and put it into practice today. Not all 9, one. Momentum matters more than magnitude, and one habit practiced consistently will outperform 9 habits attempted once and abandoned by Thursday. And if today doesn't feel like the day any of this clicks, that's fine too. Come back to this video next week and the week after, until one of these 9 habits finally lands the way it's supposed to. Self-respect was never going to get built by watching a single video once. It gets built by the choice made right after this tab closes. If this video gave you something real, hit like, drop a comment telling me which of the 9 you're starting with, share it with someone who needs to hear this today, and subscribe so you don't miss what's coming next on this channel. Last one, warriors, make it count. Drop this below one final time. I respect myself again.